Who killed comedy? Why hasn't there been a new Hangover, Tropic Thunder, Pineapple Express? Is Hollywood the culprit? Is society? Let's dive in and find out together.
Take your piss. Ice on the pinky ring. Boy got his color changing chain. Don't be off my name. Gorilla got a ring that springs phone like.
Alright, saddle up poo-poo heads, because this one's going to be a doozy. I think all my comedy purists out there can agree with me that comedy's been lacking the last few years. In fact, there's an argument to be made that
He's dead, another dead one, deadified, two more dead from the neck up, dead from the neck down.
And just as a side note, I will be anthropomorphizing comedy as a man, just to make it easier for me to make jokes, and I want to treat this as a murder investigation of sorts. I want to see who killed this fucker. And all that said, I'm not saying there aren't funny movies out there. There's obviously the straight-to-Netflix stinkers and Marvel movies, which have the occasionally funny scene.
I have sensitive nipples.
My nipples hurt, oh goodness me.
And obviously we have the fucking swarms of horror comedies over the last few years. But I'm talking about pure mid-budget comedy movies. So let's start the investigation and see who gave my man an early grave. Now, claiming comedy is dead is a bit exaggerated. Comedy definitely still has a place on television. That said, something I've noticed about this era is it doesn't have its own sitcom. Like previously, we had The Office, Parks and Rec, That 70s Show, Seinfeld, Friends. There doesn't seem to be one. There are a few survivors, notably It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and South Park, but the heat death of comedy does seem to be dated to around 2019. Now think back, what was the last really good network sitcom that you can remember really loving and waiting for week to week? If you're anything like me, it's the Michael Schur created The Good Place, which ended in the very beginning of 2020. And I know half of you probably said Schitt's Creek, but that's not a big network sitcom, and it also ended at the exact same time, so sit the fuck down. Now let's take a look at film and do the exact same thing. What was the last great comedy movie you saw? And I don't mean, that David Spade movie I saw was okay. I mean a comedy film that had you dying of laughter and had some kind of lasting impact on you longer than the fucking trip to the fridge to get a Diet Coke. And I don't care what you pick because this is my video, but I specifically remember the last great comedy movie I saw, and it's kind of embarrassing to call it a great comedy, but it's the 2019 Seth Rogen produced Good Boys. The film has a fairly simple plot. 12-year-old Max asks his friends Lucas and Thor for some help learning how to smooch a girl after being invited to a kissing party. They then lose Max's dad's drone, which they used to spy on girls, and it leads to a bunch of silly and ridiculous situations. I don't want to do a whole review of the movie, so either watch it yourself or take me at my illustrious word.
Fools! I'd have paid $1,000!
Anyone else feel like he's gonna fuck that doll?
It got middling reviews, which is par for the course on comedies. I mean, Tropic Thunder is sitting at a measly 7.1 on IMDb, and it's the funniest movie of all time in my opinion.
Hell yeah!
And the strange thing about Good Boys is it really was the only good comedy film that came out that year, in my opinion. I mean, you have films like JoJo Rabbit, but that's really more of a dramedy than a straightforward comedy film. Any other comedies you could mention kind of further prove my point that this is the year comedy died. The only film I'd entertain is Booksmart, but it really felt more like a shallow attempt to recreate the magic of Superbad that failed.
No, I couldn't be less interested in, like, whatever this is.
One of the big things I've noticed in looking at comedy movies leading up to and following 2019 is the fall of the big comedy actors. Actors we used to think were so big and could do no wrong. They've done nothing but miss lately. As an example, we can take a look at somebody like Will Ferrell, who's been on a downward trajectory. I mean, he had the Daddy's Home 1 and 2 films, which I would say are pretty funny, but he's had so many stinkers, like The House, Get Hard, Holmes and Watson, Zoolander, which brings up Ben Stiller too, who's pretty much left comedy altogether lately. But the example I want to stick to is Seth Rogen, who funnily enough is the executive producer of Good Boys. And fuck, this man has fallen from grace. And I'm sure he's wiping away the tears of his lack of talent with $1 million bills from all the random shows he ties his name to, and there's a lot of them. But I'd argue the last funny movie he's made is 2014's The Interview.
So you'll just place the ricin case in this pouch here, it will magnetically seal, and then you're good to go.
So you want me to carry this bag?
This is the bag.
This is a douchebag.
And James Franco carried this movie so hard it's not even funny. And not only has he not been in a good movie since, his entire personality has flopped into some weird LA asshole that seems like the complete antithesis of what he used to be. Let me give you a few examples. So here's a bit of a compilation of some of the unhinged shit Seth Rogen says on Twitter. So here's a kid basically saying, I'm not old enough to vote, but every vote counts. Go out there and vote. Fucking Seth Rogen. Dude, holy smokes, you're such a fucking loser. Grow the fuck up. Don't enable fascists with this kind of weak shit, kid. I'm watching you. Just crazy to say to a child. Casey Neistat gets his car broken into, gets thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment stolen. Seth Rogen says, dude, I've lived here for over 20 years. You're nuts. Haha, it's lovely here. Don't leave anything valuable in it. It's called living in a big city. which is crazy. Casey Neistat says, I can still be mad though, right? Feel so violated. Seth Rogen says, I've had my car broken into 15 or so times. Don't leave anything nice in it. Once a guy left a cool knife in the car, so you might get a treat. He talks about having Tourette's and how he has crazy twitching fests whenever he starts arguing with people on Twitter. He tells J.K. Rowling to off herself, he goes to Chick-fil-A, which if they're racist chicken like he says, he probably shouldn't be getting it, but he got a rash from it and he started bitching them out. He just can't help himself and he just goes off on Twitter like crazy. I just wish he would uninstall this shit and fucking take a step back into reality. This man is just so disconnected from reality lately, and I'm not saying that if your off-screen persona changes, you can't remain funny on film, but I think it's a little bit different whenever you're the co-writer of all your best films. It really seems like LA Living has changed this man for the worse, and I don't think he has the perspective to write things that are funny anymore. So this leads us to our first possible culprit. Did Hollywood kill comedy? I think Hollywood's a pretty obvious part of the problem, and whether Rogen's an outlier or not, it's hard to say. But I think if you take a look east at where comedy's surviving, you'll see people like Jody Hill and Danny McBride running as fast as they can to escape the Hollywood machine.
Yeah, he lived here for like 20 years, and then like I think they shot Vice Principals, which is a show right before Gemstones, and they shot in Charleston, and he had like, I don't think he'd spent that much time in Charleston, and then shooting there for like, they shot for like a year because they shot 2 seasons back to back. And he was like, I fell in love with it. He said he came back, got his stuff, and like 20 families moved out with him. And he just like moved out with a whole crew of people, and he was like, let's start at, Hollywood South.
And while this is purely speculation on my part, it really seems like after 20 years in Hollywood, that 1 year of freedom really gave him the fucking opportunity to realize how toxic that environment was. So he moved away. And through Rough House Productions, he's made shows like Righteous Gemstones and Vice Principals that really show that good comedy can exist in a modern age. I think people are often way too quick to point their fingers at studios for watering down comedies or attempting to make changes simply to cater to wider audiences.
Put a chick in it, make her gay!
I do think that's an issue at times. However, Danny McBride's consistent ability to create shows that stay true to his vision, all the while seemingly unburdened by concerns of offending people,
That's what I'm trying to get you to do, go in and out on me with that snowy white dick.
underscores that the deeper issue lies with the individuals involved, the writers, the directors, the actors. All of these people need a strong unifying vision to avoid becoming casualties of the Hollywood interference machine. They need to understand that comedy often needs to push boundaries to have a lasting impact.
What's up with it, Vanilla Face? Me and my homie Azamat just parked that slab outside. Please. We're looking for somewhere to post up our black asses for the night.
I can think of quite a few projects that died to the hand of studio interference. One that comes to mind immediately is The Happy Time Murders, which initially was a much darker and edgy film, and while it managed to retain its R rating, I can't shake the feeling that there was a much more potent film that existed on paper that never made it to the screen. Another famous case is Anchorman 2, which was famously toned down at the behest of the studio. The result was a hollow and mediocre sequel that couldn't pack the same punch as the original.
That's the most horrible thing I've ever heard.
And I think to make movies like these, you really need a passionate team that cares about the project and not just yes men out for a bag, not just weenies that'll crumble under the first bit of pressure from the studio. And where does this pressure from the studio come from? Well, that leads us to our next culprit, and I don't think you're gonna like it. Do you really think studio execs care about offending you? I think it's pretty obvious they don't, because even in an era of inclusion and political correctness,
but you don't say that.
There's still always somebody to point the finger at and be made out as a villain. Studios always want to be on what they interpret as the right side, which is the side that'll make them the most money. So I have a few reasons that studios seem to be taming down comedies, and there seems to be less money for comedies altogether. Firstly, social media. Most of the large social media platforms where film is discussed, like say Reddit or Twitter, have been largely left-leaning, which is fine, but when we're talking about social media, there doesn't tend to be a middle ground to discussion. Regardless of which side of the spectrum you're on, one side is a monster and the other one is all in on their viewpoints with swords drawn. And whichever can be louder than the other one will stand out as the majority, regardless of what the majority of America actually thinks. Now, stepping away from the political bullshit, because I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole, let's take a look at where most of society gets their comedy nowadays. Their cell phones. Now, I'm not saying TikTok can't be funny, because there's obviously some funny shit on there, but I feel like people are getting to this point where they need instant gratification for everything. They need the punchline right now.
And that's the fear now, because you're now making movies for 16-year-olds and China.
And I don't think this is exclusive to comedy, by the way. I think it hurts all film. Unless a film is a huge spectacle with flashing lights, no one wants to leave their house and go sit in a big room where they can't stare at their phone the entire time and basically ignore the whole movie like they can on their couch. Some of my favorite comedies of all time still carry a strong plot, have interesting character development throughout, and have jokes that build and may not pay off until you've patiently watched all the way until the end.
Fascist!
And I just don't think people have the attention spans anymore, but that can be fixed. And maybe I'm an optimist, but these are the things I've personally started doing to help bring back comedy, but I can't do it alone. Number 1, I don't watch TikTok. Unless my girlfriend sends me a video, I do not open that app. 2, I watch as many comedies in theater as possible. The Jennifer Lawrence movie comes out where she tries to fuck a kid, whatever, I go see it. The dumb fucking I'm a Machine guy goes to make a movie, I go watch it. These aren't good comedies, but I'm doing my part to support comedy as an art, to be the first one there when the next Superbad does come out. 3, be nicer to people. There's enough hostility in the world. Just because people have a different opinion than you online doesn't mean you need to try and tear them down and spread hate. Stop being dickheads. And I think we're slowly moving towards a culture less filled with outrage over the last year or so. As with anything, it was a bit of a trend caused by a desire for change, and while I hope the negative impact on comedy was met with a net positive impact on society, I'm not smart enough to say. But either way, that leads us to our final culprit. Is it a trend? I think the biggest trend I see lately is what I call the diversification of comedy, and what I mean by this is the comedy genre is being mashed with every other genre under the sun, namely horror as of late. The issue here is these movies have the balance all wrong. If the intention is to become the new medium for comedy, there's a difference between an action movie that's funny versus a comedy movie with action. So let's take a look at this scene from Rush Hour 3, immediately following a fight scene.
Who are you?
You.
No, not me, you.
Yes, I am you.
Just answer the damn questions. Who are you?
I have told you.
Are you deaf?
No, you is blind.
I'm not blind, you blind.
That is what I just said.
You just said what?
I did not say what. I said you.
That's what I'm asking you.
And you is answering.
Shut up. You.
Yes?
Not you, him. What's your name?
Me.
Yes, you.
I am me. He's me. And I'm you.
And I'm about to whoop your old ass.
We then have Jackie Chan take over for the more serious conversation that drives the plot. The movie never forgets that it's a comedy first and foremost. It may have some great fight scenes, but they always find some way to work the comedy into the fight itself, as well as break the tension with a hilarious back and forth. Films recently seem to think just adding one random off-kilter line equates the film being a comedy, which just isn't the case. Years ago, I used to write a lot of screenplays, so I was pretty familiar with what was being shopped around and what was popular. And about 90% of what I saw at that time was either a hitman movie or a low-budget creature horror, and once those went out of style, another fad flooded the market. It honestly feels like within the next 5 years or so, we're gonna have another resurgence of comedy, with new names taking up the place of the previous kings of comedy, the Judd Apatows and Seth Rogans. And while I do feel like this is a trend, trends don't occur for no reason. And while it's a bit anticlimactic to not be able to name a killer, I truly do think that every one of the reasons I mentioned had a hand in bludgeoning my man comedy to near death. And with that, I don't think he's dead. I think he's in life support, maybe in a coma, just waiting for the next big name in comedy to come give him a whack.
And wake up!
I think the main reason I made this video is to get people to think about how their actions and mindsets can have a big impact on the content that's being made, as well as their ability to enjoy it. So let's just not be assholes, go support comedy where we can, and try to have an overall positive outlook. We can't fix Hollywood, we can only fix our shitty attitudes. And that's the video, guys. It took me way too long and it didn't come out exactly the way I'd hoped, but if you made it to the end, please subscribe and have a good night.
Ice on the pinky ring, boy got his color changing chain. Don't be up my name. Gorilla got a ring that springs fall like rain. Every time I swing the lane, you sort of